Patricia Lowell leaned against my doorframe like she owned it, her manicured hand tapping the edge of the notice she'd just slapped on my door. "Mr. Mercer, you're already out of compliance," she said, with that sugar-coated venom only HOA board members seem to master. "We told you, without an emergency key on file, you'll be fined and, well, other actions may follow." I didn't blink. I reached for my phone, turned the screen toward her, and let the live feed of my smart lock log glow in the dusk. "Funny," I said, voice calm but cold, "because this says someone used a key that doesn't exist, and it still pings back to my private server. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back." Patricia's smile faltered for half a heartbeat before snapping back into place. "We authorized entry under policy. Safety comes first in Willow Ridge." She gestured vaguely toward the quiet street, where perfectly mowed lawns and identical mailboxes gleamed like nothing bad could ever happen here. "My name's Evan Mercer," I said, voice low, even. "Cybersecurity consultant. I've built systems to keep billion-dollar companies safe, and I can see every time someone touches this door. I left my last house because my ex-wife wouldn't stop trying to crawl back into my life. This place..." I glanced toward the garage, where the silhouette of my late father's oak workbench stood like a sentry. "This house is supposed to be mine, safe, untouchable. I'd spent 3 years restoring that workbench with him before the heart attack took him. Every gouge and scar in that oak was a memory. Lazy Saturday afternoons smelling of sawdust and coffee. His rough voice telling me how to line up a joint just right. When I finally moved to Willow Ridge, I thought I'd left all the chaos behind. That workbench was my last piece of him, and I swore no one would violate this space. Yet, here I was, catching the HOA giving my abusive ex access to my home, my sanctuary, my father's memory. Patricia wasn't just breaking rules. She was breaking into the last corner of my life I couldn't replace. "Where are you watching from?" I asked, the question almost slipping out like a thought. I wanted people to feel this, to understand the humiliation of being cornered by smug authority in your own doorway. Patricia's eyes flicked toward my camera on the eave. Maybe she finally realized the quiet man with the tidy lawn wasn't as easy to push as she thought. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My calm was the kind that comes before a storm, and even she could feel it. "I'll get your key on file by next week," she said, trying to regain footing. "Or consequences?" I stepped closer until she had to lean back a fraction. "Patricia, I already know who's been inside my home. I already know every time stamp. And I already know this policy of yours doesn't exist in any state-approved bylaw." I let the words hang in the summer air, soft but final. She sniffed, muttered something about community safety, and finally turned, heels clicking down my driveway. I didn't slam the door. I just stood there, watching her leave, letting the silence settle heavy in my chest. Inside, the house felt different, tainted. I ran my hand along the edge of that oak workbench in the garage, rough and cool under my palm. My father's voice might as well have been in the room, saying what I was already thinking. "You gonna let them get away with this, son? Number? This HOA had just chosen the wrong man to toy with. They thought they were the hunters. They hadn't realized they'd just walked into my network, my logs, my evidence trail. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because Patricia Lowell just opened a door she'll wish she'd kept locked." The next morning, a bright yellow envelope flapped on my mailbox like a warning flag. I already knew what it was before I touched it. Another violation notice. Sure enough, in bold black letters, it read, "Mandatory Emergency Key Policy. Final Notice." Beneath that, the HOA threatened daily fines and further actions, including suspension of amenity access if I didn't comply. I stood there, the sun barely cresting over the neat row of identical roofs, and felt the anger simmer low in my gut. I wasn't the only one getting hit. Across the street, old Mr. Kenley, who used a walker to reach his porch, bent to pick up his own notice with a frustrated grunt. He caught my eye and shook his head. "They fined me last month for weeds," he muttered. "I can't even bend without help. They sent me 3 letters before they even knocked on my door." I nodded, my hand tightening on the envelope. "They ever ask you for a key?" His sigh said everything. Told them no. They said they'd handle it. I don't like the way they handle things. I glanced around. The street was quiet, but the whispers were there. People mowing lawns too often, porch lights checked like they were crime scenes, strangers snapping photos of siding that wasn't straight enough. Patricia's HOA didn't just enforce rules, they hunted for them. By afternoon, I decided to take a walk to the small park tucked behind the community pond. It was the one place here that felt a little less manufactured, where you could smell real grass instead of fertilizer and hear kids laughing without that HOA leash on their necks. Sure enough, I found a cluster of neighbors on a bench near the playground, talking in low voices. I approached slowly, hands in pockets, letting them size me up. A woman I vaguely recognized, Shelley, 2 doors down, gave a quick nod. "You got one of these?" I asked, holding up my violation notice. Her eyes flashed, and she pulled 2 from her bag. "They hit me for a lawn height discrepancy last week. I just paid it because, well, you know how they are. My husband said if we fight it, they'll just look for something worse." Another man, tall and wiry, leaned in. "They shut down my side gate because the paint color didn't match the approved scheme. I had no idea they even changed the scheme until after they fined me. Feels like they're making stuff up as they go." I let that sink in. This wasn't just me. Patricia's little empire had its claws in everyone, and most people were too scared or tired to fight. "You all ever see them actually vote on this key policy?" I asked. Blank stares. A few murmured no or shook their heads. "I didn't even know we had a key policy until this week," Shelley said. "And I've been here 7 years." I filed that away in the back of my mind. No vote, no notice. Just Patricia acting like queen of the cul-de-sac. My father used to say that some bullies wore suits and carried clipboards instead of fists. He was right. As the sun dipped lower, I headed back home, with the violation notice still in my pocket. I passed rows of manicured hedges and identical shutters, but all I could think about was how much fear and quiet resentment simmered behind those walls. The HOA didn't just enforce rules, it controlled people through embarrassment and exhaustion. At my front door, I paused to glance at the camera feed on my phone. No movement today, but the knowledge that Patricia had already let my ex into my home once, maybe more, made my skin crawl. That oak workbench in my garage wasn't just wood, it was trust, it was memory. And if I lost that safe space, I'd lose more than a house. I leaned against the porch railing, letting the warm evening air settle over me. My mind wasn't on compliance, it was on patterns. I'd seen it before in my work, systems that seemed airtight until you followed the data trail and watched them fall apart under scrutiny. I spotted Derek Coleman at the neighborhood mail kiosk, just as the sun began to slide behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street. He stood stiffly, shoulders hunched, flipping through a stack of envelopes like each one carried a small dose of shame. I slowed my steps, feeling the familiar itch of curiosity. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He jumped slightly, then nodded. "Evening, Evan." His eyes darted to the corner where the HOA bulletin board was tacked with new notices. I pulled open my own box, the metal creaking, and scanned for any new threats from Patricia. Just a glossy newsletter about community pride, and some offers for lawn care services that felt suspiciously like a setup. "Another notice?" I asked, gesturing at his pile. He hesitated, his jaw flexing. "Yeah. They said my garbage bins were visible from the street again. I moved them after the first letter. But..." His voice trailed off, and he shoved the paper deeper into the pile. I leaned against the post, studying him. "Derek, can I ask you something?" He froze, the last bit of mail clutched in his hand. "Depends," he said slowly. "Do you ever feel like this whole key policy thing is off?" I asked. "Like it wasn't done right?" His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft rattle of tree leaves in the warm evening breeze. He didn't answer right away, but the way his eyes flicked toward the street, checking if anyone was watching, said more than words. I just work here," he finally muttered. His tone was heavy with something I recognized from my years consulting for nervous IT staff, guilt wrapped in self-preservation. "You're the secretary, right?" I said gently. "If anyone would know the rules, it's you." Derek swallowed hard, and his fingers fidgeted with the edge of a flyer. His shoulders tensed like he was holding something in that might burst. "Look," he said quietly, glancing around again. "I don't like how she does things, but Patricia, she doesn't take kindly to anyone questioning her. Last guy who did lost his shed privileges and got slapped with 4 violations in a week. I got a mortgage, Evan. I can't—" He shook his head, leaving the sentence unfinished. I nodded, letting the silence stretch. "I get it. I really do." I wanted to push for more, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. A man torn between doing what was right and surviving under Patricia's rule. His hands trembled slightly as he tucked the last envelope under his arm. He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Just keep your cameras on," he said, almost a whisper, "and maybe check the timestamps." That little breadcrumb was all I needed. I didn't smile, didn't thank him, just gave a slow nod. In neighborhoods like this, alliances were quiet and dangerous, and Derek had just risked more than he probably realized. Walking back toward my house, I felt the weight of the conversation settle in. Derek was scared. Everyone here was scared. Patricia had built a culture where neighbors didn't just avoid each other, they hid from each other. And somewhere in that fear was my opening. I stepped into my garage and let my hand brush the oak workbench again, grounding myself. My father had faced down harder men than HOA bullies in his time, and he'd always told me, fear is their first weapon. Once you stop giving it to them, they've got nothing left. I checked my phone and pulled up the camera feeds. The logs were quiet tonight, but Derek's warning clung to me like the smell of gasoline, something flammable waiting for a spark. If Patricia was willing to let my ex into my home once, she'd do it again. And when she did, I'd be ready. Drop a like if you've ever felt trapped by rules you didn't agree to, and subscribe to see how. This quiet standoff is about to turn into a war Patricia Lowell won't see coming. The next escalation came faster than I expected. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand and squinted at the screen. A new email from the HOA, stamped at 6:02 a.m. Subject line in all caps, violation notice, illegal security system. I sat up, adrenaline flushing away whatever sleep I had left. Illegal security system? My cameras were entirely on my property, with no view into anyone else's windows. They were the same kind I'd recommended to corporate clients for years. Still, the HOA claimed they breached community privacy guidelines and demanded I disable them within 48 hours or face daily fines and a legal complaint. I swung my legs off the bed and padded barefoot into the living room. Through the blinds, I caught a glimpse of Patricia Lowell walking briskly down the sidewalk, clipboard tucked under one arm like a sheriff's badge. She stopped at my driveway, snapped a picture of my porch camera, and jotted something down. My jaw tightened. By the time I opened the door, she was halfway across the street. "Patricia," I called, voice sharp enough to carry. She turned, that saccharine smile plastered on like always. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. You sent me a notice about my cameras." "That's correct," she said smoothly. "They violate privacy guidelines. We've had complaints." "Complaints from who?" I asked. Her smile didn't waver. "We don't disclose that. Community safety is our top priority." I felt a bitter laugh catch in my throat. Safety, that word again. Safety apparently meant my ex could stroll into my home, but I wasn't allowed to record who touched my doorknob. "You realize," I said, stepping onto the driveway, "these cameras are fully within state law. They only record my property. You can't make up rules to strip me of security." Her expression hardened for a fraction of a second before she masked it with that fake civility. "Our lawyer will decide that if necessary. I'd suggest cooperation if you want to avoid complications." I watched her turn and leave, the heels of her shoes clicking on the concrete. My pulse drummed in my ears, but beneath the anger was something colder, a calculating certainty. Patricia was trying to blind me. First she broke into my home through policy manipulation, and now she wanted to take away the one layer of defense I had left. By mid-morning, I was in the neighborhood common area, a small manicured courtyard with a fountain no one actually used. I sat on a stone bench, pretending to scroll through my phone while I watched Patricia and 2 other board members perform their little patrol. They pointed at hedges, muttered, took photos. One of them even crouched to inspect a crack in the sidewalk like it was a moral failing. Across the courtyard, a neighbor with a toddler on her hip gave me a sympathetic look. She mouthed the word sorry, and I realized just how many people were silently enduring Patricia's reign. They wanted someone to push back. They just didn't dare. I walked home with the violation notice folded in my pocket, the edges damp with sweat. Inside, I checked my camera feeds. Every lens was still live, every log still uploading to my offsite server. I leaned against the garage doorway, hand on the oak workbench, and let the steady thrum of quiet defiance settle in my chest. My father's words echoed in my memory. You can't stop someone from pushing you, but you can decide when you push back. Patricia was playing a dangerous game. By trying to take my cameras offline, she wasn't just overstepping. She was creating a legal paper trail. Every threat, every false violation, every attempt to suppress my right to secure my home was another brick in the wall I was building against her. The house was quiet that night, except for the soft hum of my servers in the office. I sat in the dark, the glow from my monitors painting the room in cold blue light, and scrolled through the smart lock logs again. Something about Derek's warning from the other night wouldn't leave my head. Check the timestamps. I pulled up the last month of entries and lined them up against my own calendar. I didn't just see numbers, I saw patterns. My professional brain, trained to find vulnerabilities in networks, caught it immediately. The unauthorized entries all happened on Thursdays and Fridays, late afternoon, within an hour of HOA board meetings or, my stomach twisted, my ex-wife Melissa's court appearances. I clicked into the first entry. 4:12 p.m., door unlocked with key. No authorized users listed. I tabbed over to the corresponding camera clip, heart pounding. There she was, Melissa, wearing a dark coat and sunglasses like some amateur spy, stepping inside my house as if she still lived here. She didn't notice the camera tucked into the bookshelf shadow. I watched her stroll through the living room, pausing to look at framed photos I hadn't packed away. A cold fury coiled in my chest. She wasn't just trespassing, she was savoring it. Another log, 5:03 p.m., same day. A text alert to Patricia's HOA email address sent 30 seconds before the entry. That was my smoking gun. Patricia had personally enabled these visits. I opened another clip, jaw tightening. Melissa in the garage, hand brushing the edge of my father's oak workbench. She wasn't careful. A screwdriver rolled off and clattered to the floor, leaving a faint scratch in the varnish. My throat tightened. That wasn't just a workbench. It was the last piece of my dad I could touch, and she'd put a mark on it like it meant nothing. By the third video, my initial rage had cooled into something sharper. Resolve. Patricia had turned my home into a revolving door for a woman I'd gone to court to escape, and she'd done it under the guise of community safety, without a single vote or legal standing. I started exporting clips, time-stamped and labeled. I created a spreadsheet cross-referencing every unauthorized entry with HOA meetings and my ex's known schedule. The pattern was undeniable. Patricia had abused her position to give Melissa access to my home whenever it suited her. I leaned back, staring at the oak workbench visible on the garage feed. I could almost hear my father's voice. Don't just get mad. Get it in writing. In my world, that meant digital proof no one could argue with. By midnight, I'd built a folder titled HOA Trespass Evidence, with video files, logs, and screenshots. I uploaded everything to secure cloud storage and mirrored it to a private drive. My professional life had been full of breach reports and forensic evidence collections, but this was personal. When I finally shut down the monitors, I walked into the garage. The faint scratch on the workbench caught the light. My chest tightened, a mix of grief and steel-edged determination. They had turned this from a nuisance into a violation I couldn't ignore. I ran my hand over the wood, thinking about every time Dad and I had stood here, building things that would outlast both of us. That workbench wasn't just oak and screws, it was a boundary, and Patricia and Melissa had crossed it. It happened on a humid Thursday evening, the kind where the air clings to your skin and every sound seems sharper. I was finishing a client report in my home office when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the garage camera. At first, I assumed it was a raccoon, or maybe a neighbor kid cutting across my driveway. But when I tapped the notification and the live feed opened, my stomach went cold. Melissa. She was inside my garage again, her dark hair pulled into a tight knot, glancing around like she owned the place. In one hand, she held a flashlight. In the other, she casually dragged her fingers across my father's oak workbench. I froze, the air leaving my lungs in a slow hiss. Then she leaned over, squinting at the drawer handles and something in her hand, a metal keyring, scratched against the surface with a sound that made my teeth clench. I turned on the audio feed and caught her muttering to herself. Should have been mine anyway. All of it. Her voice had that bitter edge I knew too well. Then she pulled the top drawer open, rummaging through my carefully organized tools, and a screwdriver slipped out, clattering to the concrete. The metallic echo filled the garage, followed by the faint rasp of wood against metal as it scraped a line across the workbench's varnish. I didn't move. I didn't yell or call the police right away. I just watched, my chest tight with a mix of grief and fury. That scratch wasn't just a mark on wood. It was a violation of memory, of the one place that had stayed untouched since Dad's passing. He'd built that bench for me, every joint cut with his own hands, every groove filled with lessons about patience and precision. Melissa glanced toward the door like she heard something, then slipped out, leaving the garage in darkness again. I exhaled slowly, forcing the anger to settle into something sharper. Resolve. If I'd had any hesitation before, it was gone now. I walked into the garage and flicked on the light. The scratch was thin but unmistakable, running diagonally near the edge where my father and I had once carved our initials during the final coat of finish. I crouched down, fingertips brushing the roughened line, and felt a weight settle on my chest. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. I took photos from multiple angles, making sure the timestamp from my phone matched the camera log. Then I exported the video clip, filed it in the growing HOA trespass evidence folder, and backed it up to the cloud. This wasn't going to be a conversation, this was going to be a reckoning. Later that night, I sat in the garage with the door half open, letting the warm night air drift in. My laptop glowed softly on the workbench, and the quiet hum of the server fan sounded almost like a heartbeat. I could feel my father here with me in a way, steady, calm, reminding me that patience wins fights like this, not rage. Patricia had crossed the final line. By enabling Melissa to break into my home and damage something that was practically sacred to me, she'd handed me the leverage I needed. It wasn't just a violation of my property anymore. It was emotional harm, trespass, and a clear abuse of her position. Drop a like if you've ever had someone take something they had no right to, and subscribe if you want to see what happens when that person realizes they picked the wrong target. I closed the garage door and locked it, the metal bolt sliding home with a satisfying click. My plan was no longer abstract. It was real, set in motion, and backed by evidence that would speak louder than any argument. By the time I went to bed, I wasn't just protecting a house anymore. I was defending a legacy. And I wasn't going to let Patricia Lowell or my ex-wife walk over it one more time. The following Saturday morning, I was in my garage tightening a hinge on the storage cabinet when I heard hesitant footsteps on the driveway. I looked up through the open garage door and saw Derek Coleman standing there, shoulders slumped, a paper coffee cup in his hand like it was a shield. He glanced around before stepping inside, eyes darting toward the camera above my workbench. "Hey," he said quietly, "mind if we talk?" I set the screwdriver down and wiped my hands on a rag. "Sure. What's on your mind?" He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I don't know how much longer I can keep quiet." His voice cracked on the last word, and he shot a nervous look over his shoulder, as if Patricia might appear at any second. I gestured toward the workbench stool. "Sit. You look like you're carrying 100 pounds of stress." He sat, elbows on his knees, staring at the concrete floor. "Patricia, she's gone too far. I know it. Everyone knows it. But I'm the secretary, and if I say anything, I could lose my house. She's vindictive." I leaned against the bench, crossing my arms. "Derek, I already know she's been letting Melissa into my house. I've got the footage, the logs, the timestamps. I'm building a case." His head snapped up. You already know?" "Yeah, and now I need something else. I need proof that this whole emergency key policy isn't even real." He chewed his lip, eyes flicking to the camera again. "It's not," he whispered. "She made it up. There was never a vote, no board approval, no notice filed with the county like the bylaws require. She just printed notices and acted like it was policy." The weight of those words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. "You have evidence of that?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Meeting minutes, emails, even a draft of the policy with her notes on it, like she was workshopping her own authority. I've been keeping copies, just in case." I felt a flicker of admiration for him beneath the tension. Derek wasn't just scared. He was quietly preparing for the day someone would push back. That day was here. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, setting it on the workbench. "Everything's on here. Emails, minutes, timestamps. If you're gonna fight her, this is how you do it." I picked up the drive, feeling its weight like it was solid gold. "Derek, you're sure about this?" He swallowed hard. "If I don't help now, she'll just keep doing it to the next person. And the next. I can't keep pretending I don't see it." I slipped the drive into my pocket, the oak workbench beneath my hand grounding me. My father used to say that standing up to bullies meant someone had to take the first step into the storm. Derek had just taken his. "Thank you," I said. "I won't waste this." His shoulders eased slightly, though his eyes still carried that haunted look. "Just be careful. She's good at making problems for people. And if she finds out I helped you—" "She won't," I said firmly. "When this is over, she's going to have bigger problems than you or me." He gave a single nod and left the garage quietly, disappearing down the street like a man who just handed over a secret he'd been carrying too long. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the server in the corner. The USB drive in my pocket felt like a key. Not the kind Patricia had demanded, but the kind that opened the door to her downfall. The next evening, I turned my home office into a war room. My monitors glowed with rows of emails, meeting minutes, and time-stamped camera feeds. Derek's USB drive sat on the desk like a detonator, and my fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who'd spent years tracing breaches through corporate networks. But this time, I wasn't protecting a company. I was dismantling Patricia Lowell's grip on my neighborhood. First, I organized everything into categories: unauthorized access, false policies, and board misconduct. I highlighted every email where Patricia had instructed Derek to just file it under standard safety measures without any board approval. She used phrases like, "They don't need to know the details," and "By the time anyone complains, it'll be too late." Then I cross-referenced them with the smart lock logs and camera footage. The pattern was airtight. She'd issued a fabricated emergency key policy, given Melissa access multiple times, and targeted me with retaliatory notices when I refused to comply. In cybersecurity, we call this a forensic chain, a step-by-step map of cause and effect. In court, that same chain destroys liars. I leaned back for a moment, letting the soft whir of the server fill the room. My father would have loved this, watching me turn patience and precision into a weapon. He used to say, "If you can show someone the trap they built for themselves, you never have to raise your voice." My phone buzzed with another HOA email. This one accused me of refusing to comply with a lawful directive and warned of fines pending board review. I laughed quietly. Patricia had no idea I was already building a case that would make her regret every smug notice she'd ever printed. I opened a fresh document and started outlining my counterplan. Step 1. Compile a digital evidence packet with video, logs, and Derek's emails. Step 2. Compare the fake policy against our HOA bylaws and state statutes. I had already bookmarked the relevant pages on the state website, rules Patricia clearly never read. Step 3. Prepare a legal notice of intent to challenge the HOA's authority, addressed to the entire board. While the plan formed, I thought about the neighbors I'd spoken to in the park and courtyard, Shelley with her lawn height fines, Mr. Kenley with his garbage bin violation. They were tired, frustrated, and scared. Patricia had been thriving on that fear for years, but fear doesn't hold up when someone finally shows the truth in black and white. I spent hours layering screenshots into a single timeline. 4:12 p.m., Melissa enters the house. 4:13 p.m., email from Patricia to Derek. All set, don't log this one in the minutes. 4:15 p.m., camera feed shows her in the garage, leaving the scratch on the workbench. Every frame, every bite, every note was a brick in the wall I was building around myself, and the cage I was building for her. At midnight, I took a break and walked into the garage. The night air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and asphalt. I ran my hand along the oak workbench, my thumb tracing that scratch. It, no longer made me flinch. Now it fueled me. That scar was proof of their arrogance, and soon it would be the reason Patricia's name was read in a legal complaint. When I returned to the office, I encrypted the evidence folder and mirrored it to 3 separate locations. If Patricia tried to intimidate me, or if Melissa tried another stunt, I was prepared. My plan wasn't about yelling or threatening. It was about pulling the pin and letting the truth do the work. By the time I shut down for the night, my counterplan was complete. Step by step, I knew exactly how to take Patricia from smug and untouchable to cornered and accountable. And when it was over, Willow Ridge would never look at her the same way again. The following Monday, I stepped into the downtown law office with a flash drive in my pocket and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're holding a loaded deck. The receptionist gave me a polite smile and led me into a small conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. My reflection in the glass looked composed, but I could feel the storm underneath my ribs. A few minutes later, Attorney Michael Stroud walked in, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a folder already labeled Mercer vs. Willow Ridge HOA. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. "I reviewed your email," he said. "You said you have evidence of unauthorized access and procedural misconduct?" I slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on here. Video, smart lock logs, internal emails from the HOA secretary, and copies of our bylaws. You're going to see a pattern. Patricia Lowell fabricated an emergency key policy, used it to let my ex-wife into my home, and then issued false violation notices when I refused to comply." He plugged the drive into his laptop and clicked through the files. I watched his expression shift from mild interest to that slow, deliberate nod lawyers do when the pieces start forming a winning case. "This is thorough," he said. "And you have time-stamped video of the unauthorized entries?" "Multiple angles," I said, "including one of her scratching my father's oak workbench in the garage. That bench is the reason I'm not letting this slide. This isn't just trespassing, it's personal." He leaned back in his chair. "You're sitting on a procedural goldmine. If the policy wasn't voted in or documented in the minutes, and you can prove she acted alone, that's a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Pair that with video evidence of unauthorized entry, and we're looking at civil liability that could hit her directly, not just the HOA. I felt a controlled satisfaction settle over me. Patricia wanted me to fear fines and petty notices. She had no idea she was one bad email away from losing her footing entirely. "Here's what I suggest," Stroud said, tapping the folder. "We draft a notice of intent to sue the HOA for trespass, harassment, and procedural violations. We also send a preservation letter to the board to prevent them from deleting any communications. That alone will shake them." "Do it," I said without hesitation. By the time I left his office, the sun was high over the city, and my plan had moved from theory to execution. I walked to my car feeling like the weight on my chest had shifted into something sharper, purpose. Back at Willow Ridge, I didn't go straight inside. I walked the neighborhood instead, past the identical lawns and silent houses, imagining the quiet conversations happening behind closed doors. People were fed up with Patricia, even if they were afraid to say it. I noticed Shelley peeking through her curtains as I passed. She gave a small, supportive nod when our eyes met. Word was spreading that I wasn't rolling over. In my garage, I spread the remaining documents across the oak workbench, aligning them like pieces of a puzzle. Derek's emails, my timeline of entries, screenshots of bylaws, all of it was becoming a weapon. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "If you do it right the first time, you only have to do it once." He was talking about woodworking, but it applied to dismantling bullies too. Before the day ended, I'd scanned and cataloged everything into my encrypted cloud folders. I drafted my own notes for the public meeting, scheduled for the following week, carefully planning how to present the evidence without tipping my entire hand early. Patricia thrived on intimidation. She had no idea that by the time she realized she was cornered, it would be too late. Drop a like if you've ever felt the satisfaction of quietly stacking the deck against someone who underestimated you. And subscribe if you want to see the exact moment this plan hits the boardroom like a hammer. The first shot landed on a Tuesday morning. My phone buzzed with a delivery alert. And when I opened the front door, a certified letter sat on the doormat like a coiled snake. I didn't even need to read the sender to know Patricia Lowell had just received her own. Inside, I set the envelope on my oak workbench, savoring the moment. My attorney's notice of intent to sue had gone out to every board member, outlining trespass, harassment, and procedural violations. It demanded a response within 10 business days and explicitly instructed them to preserve all communications. Patricia couldn't bully her way out of that with a fake smile and a clipboard. I pictured her opening that letter, the calm confidence slipping from her face as the reality hit. For years, she'd hidden behind petty notices and vague threats. Now, she was the one under the microscope. I started my morning routine like any other, but my mind buzzed with anticipation. I brewed coffee, checked my smart lock logs, and pulled up the live camera feeds. No motion, no trespasses, just the quiet of a neighborhood that didn't yet know it was about to watch its queen fall. By early afternoon, I decided to take a casual stroll past the HOA office. It wasn't much more than a converted model home, a bland little building with blinds drawn tight. But today, the blinds were cracked. Through the narrow gap, I caught a glimpse of Patricia and two board members huddled around a table, papers spread out like a crisis war room. Her hands waved in sharp, frantic motions. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I lingered on the sidewalk, pretending to check my phone. That's when Derek appeared from the side entrance, his face tight but calm. He didn't stop walking, just murmured as he passed, "She's panicking. They're talking settlements already." I gave the smallest nod, letting the satisfaction settle without showing too much. The trap was working. Back home, I focused on final preparations. I organized my evidence into 3 label binders: video proof, digital logs, and internal communications. Each binder had printed screenshots with QR codes linking to the original files, time-stamped and mirrored across 3 cloud servers. My lawyer had advised me to prepare a public-friendly version for the upcoming HOA meeting, something that neighbors could understand without needing a degree in cybersecurity. I laid the materials across my oak workbench, running my hand over the scratch Melissa had left. Instead of grief or anger, I felt resolve. That scar had become a battle flag, proof that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Late in the afternoon, a new email arrived from the HOA board. Special meeting scheduled, attendance encouraged. They'd called it for Friday evening at the community clubhouse. That was the stage I'd been waiting for, a place where Patricia couldn't hide behind private letters or whispered threats. I spent the evening rehearsing my timeline out loud, pacing my living room as if the neighbors were already seated in folding chairs. My father's words echoed in my memory. "Stand steady, son. Let the truth do the talking." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, I sat on the porch and watched the street lamps flicker on. The air was still, but underneath it, the neighborhood felt alive with tension. Shelley waved from across the street, and even from that distance, I could see the flicker of hope in her expression. Word was spreading. Patricia's grip was slipping. The community clubhouse smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant when I walked in, but the air was electric with tension. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, neighbors filling them in hushed clusters. Some whispered, some just watched the door, waiting for the show they didn't know they were about to get. At the front, Patricia Lowell perched behind a folding table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Mercer," she said when I approached the sign-in sheet, her voice dripping with false calm. "Here to discuss your non-compliance?" I set my binder on the table with a quiet thud. "Here to discuss yours." The room went still. A couple of neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. Patricia cleared her throat and gestured to the room. "This is a routine meeting. Please, everyone, keep comments respectful." I turned to face the crowd, holding up the first binder. "Some of you have gotten these notices: fines for lawn height, garbage bins, paint colors, and now, the so-called emergency key policy." Murmurs rippled across the room. I saw Shelley in the second row, nodding vigorously. "Patricia Lowell issued that policy without a board vote, without minutes, without authority," I said, flipping open to a printed email with her signature. "And while she was waving these rules at all of you, she used it to give my ex-wife a key to my home." Gasps scattered through the room like pebbles on water. Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I pressed the button on the small, portable screen I'd set up, and a video clip filled the room with the soft click of a door unlocking. Melissa appeared on the screen, stepping into my garage, flashlight in hand. That, I said, voice steady, is a woman who does not live in Willow Ridge. That is a woman who was invited into my home by Patricia's fabricated authority. I clicked to the next clip, Melissa's hand brushing the oak workbench, the screwdriver clattering to the concrete, the faint scratch across the varnish. I heard a neighbor mutter, "Oh my God." Patricia sputtered, This is an exaggeration." I lifted the second binder and held up a copy of the bylaws. Section 4.2. Any new access or security policy requires majority board approval and written notice to all homeowners. Derek? From the back, Derek Coleman rose to his feet, pale but steady. His voice carried better than I expected. There was no vote. Patricia acted alone, and she told me to keep it out of the minutes. The room erupted, murmurs, whispers, a few outright exclamations of, "I knew it," and "unbelievable." Shelley stood up and crossed her arms, glaring at Patricia. "So all those fines, all those threats, were fake?" Patricia stammered, I was acting in the community's best interest." "No," I said, calm and clear, letting the silence fall between words. "You were abusing your position. You trespassed. You harassed. And now you're facing legal action personally, not just as a board member." The board member on her right, Greg, a man I'd barely spoken to before, shifted in his chair and finally muttered, "Patricia, we can't defend this. We need to resolve it before the whole HOA is dragged under." The crowd erupted again, but this time with a surge of voices calling for her resignation, for repayment of fines, for an end to the intimidation. For the first time since I'd moved to Willow Ridge, I saw fear flicker in Patricia Lowell's eyes. I let the room breathe, then gave a small nod. Drop a like if you've ever dreamed of standing up to someone who thought they were untouchable, and subscribe if you want to see how this story ends, because Patricia's reign ends tonight. The president called for order, but it was clear the tide had turned. Neighbors were standing, demanding accountability, and the board members looked cornered. Patricia's fingers twitched on the table as she realized the room, the very community she thought she owned, was no longer hers. I packed my binders slowly, letting the buzz of whispered rebellion fill the air. The meeting wasn't over, but the confrontation had done its work. Patricia was crumbling, and she knew it. By the time the special meeting adjourned, Patricia Lowell was no longer the voice of Willow Ridge. Neighbors had left in small clusters, whispering plans for a vote to remove her from the board. Derek lingered by the door, shoulders straighter than I'd ever seen them, and gave me a small nod. For the first time, he didn't look like a man hiding in his own neighborhood. 2 weeks later, the final blow landed. My attorney called as I was in the garage, polishing the oak workbench. Sunlight slanted across the wood, catching the thin scratch Melissa had left, a scar that had turned into a symbol of everything I'd fought to protect. "Evan," he said, "settlement's finalized." Patricia signed. "HOA's insurance will cover your legal fees, and she's personally liable for damages. She's surrendering her house to cover the judgment. You're clear, completely." I leaned against the workbench, letting the weight of it settle in. "She's really leaving?" "She has 30 days to vacate. The board agreed to formally void the so-called key policy and issue a community apology. You won, Evan. Cleanly." After the call, I stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter somehow. Across the street, Mr. Kenley was walking to his mailbox without that usual slump in his shoulders. Shelley waved from her porch. Word had spread fast. Patricia's reign was over, and the neighborhood felt freer. A week later, I watched the moving truck back into Patricia's driveway. She stood at the curb with her arms crossed, her confidence finally gone. Some neighbors peeked through blinds, but no one came to her defense. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always need a victory dance. Sometimes it's just the quiet of knowing the fight is over. Back in the garage, I opened the window to let in the breeze and sat at my father's workbench. The tools were lined up neatly, and the oak smelled faintly of the lemon oil I'd used to clean it. I remembered the way Dad used to rest his hand on my shoulder, telling me to measure twice and cut once. This whole fight had been my measure twice moment, gathering proof, building a strategy, and waiting for the exact cut that would change everything. Derek stopped by that evening. holding 2 cold sodas like an awkward peace offering. "I heard she's gone for good," he said. "She is," I said, popping the tab. "And the board's rewriting every policy with real votes this time." He glanced around the garage, eyes landing on the workbench. "I guess you got your house back." I nodded. "I got more than that. I got proof that you don't have to let people like her run your life. You just have to be willing to stand steady and do the work." He gave a small smile and raised his can. "To standing steady, then." We clinked cans, and for the first time since I moved to Willow Ridge, I felt like the neighborhood truly belonged to the people who lived in it, not the clipboard tyrant who tried to own it. As night settled, I closed the garage and leaned on the doorframe for a moment, watching the street lamps glow on quiet driveways. The fight had cost me sleepless nights and the sting of seeing my father's work scarred, but it had ended the way he would have wanted, me standing my ground, protecting what mattered. If you've ever had to defend your home, your dignity, or just the simple right to feel safe where you live, I want to hear your story. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, and share the battles you've faced against overreaching HOAs. "Some scars," I said softly to myself, hand brushing the oak, "aren't damage. They're reminders that you didn't let anyone take what's yours.